Good morning, students. So today we are going to look at one of the method of teaching English, and it's going to be natural approach. So earlier classes we have been talking about different methodology and about the difference between approach and method and things like that. So right now we are going to launch into one particular method called natural approach by Stephen Krashen and Terrell. So let's we'll move into the overview of the lecture. So here I'm going to talk about, Richards and Rogers actually give us this kind of a framework to describe about any particular methodology, teaching methodology for that matter. So I'm actually taking his framework to talk about this particular natural approach. And when he talks about a particular method, he talks about three aspects actually, like approach, design and techniques as well. So, but here we are not going to look at techniques because that would be a very extensive lecture. So, we have just confined ourselves to approach and design alone for today's lecture. So, let us look at approach. So, under approach, we generally talk about before getting into approach, we will also look at the background of this particular research. So, this was actually, this natural approach was actually founded by Tracy Terrell in 1977, and he started talking about this particular approach for a long time in different conferences and things like that. And later on, Stephen Krashen also collaborated along with him, and then they perfected this method, I would say. And it was Krashen's theory of language learning which was used as a kind of scientific evidence for this particular approach which Tracy Terrell proposed initially. And they both got together in 1983 and they came up with a book called The Natural Approach, Language Acquisition in the Classroom. And they identified natural approach as a kind of a traditional approach. And when we actually talk about natural approach, people generally tend to confuse it with natural method. Now, what exactly is natural method and what's the difference is what we are going to look at the next slide. So, natural method is very closely connected to direct method which was followed in 1900s for that matter. And why did they call it as natural method is like natural is something which is very closely resembles the language acquisition of let's say like first language acquisition of a child, and that's why direct method was considered to be a natural method. Now, if you look at natural approach, they also look at closely observing the naturalistic principles of acquisition, but not first language but the second language. And both of the methods actually talk about using directly communicating using the target language, but there is a difference. For example, in natural method you would find they were very reluctant to introduce writing and speaking skills to the students. But whereas in natural approach you find they were using reading and writing material as a comprehensible input for the learners. And apart from that, we are also aware like natural method they used a lot of verbal cues, demonstration, teacher monologues, gestures and gesticulations, whereas that was not found in natural approach because it was more to do with improving the communicative competence of the learners. And moving on to the approach aspect, that is the theory of language. So what exactly was the theory of language, or what was the view of language that they had? So in any when we talk about approach, there are three different views of language, and one is structural, functional and interactional. Now if you look at structural, even though this particular method proposes to is built on the assumption it is communication is vital, and that is the most important aspect, and communicative competence of the learner should be given importance. You do find in this particular method they are actually concentrating on structures, that is grammatical structures, but of course the focus is on vocabulary. Okay, so if the question is asked like in this particular method what is more important, is it vocabulary or is it grammar, then the natural approach a person would say it is only the vocabulary, because primacy is given to the vocabulary, not to the grammar. But of course grammar is important, that's why they feel like mastery of structure is very important. And of course the functional aspect of the semantic and communicative dimensions are also emphasized in this particular approach. So we could say in short that all the three views are actually used in this particular approach of language teaching. And moving on to the theory of learning, see any theory of learning for that matter, I mean all the methods that comes under ELT, any theory for that matter would have to grapple with these two questions, like what are the psycholinguistic and cognitive processes involved in the language learning, and what are the conditions that need to be met in order for these learning processes to be activated. To answer, I mean some of the methods would answer just one question, or some would answer both the questions. So in this particular natural approach, it answers both the questions, and they answer both the questions based on this particular theory, that is hypothesis about second language acquisition. And this particular theory was, hypothesis 5 hypothesis was completely proposed by Stephen Krashen, and that was taken to explain as a kind of scientific evidence for this particular approach. So let's look at what exactly are these 5 hypotheses. And why did Krashen actually use the word hypothesis? Like is also we have to look at, before getting into it, we also should look at who exactly is Krashen. I guess like most of us are aware that Krashen is one of the linguists from America, and he's an educational researcher, he's a ELT practitioner, of course he is also a political activist as well. When he propounded it like say 1980s, and even now he talks about it, okay, and he keeps writing and he keeps researching about this particular 5 hypotheses, but he continues to maintain this as a hypothesis, and we would wonder like why, okay. But first we need to understand like what exactly is hypothesis. Hypothesis is a kind of any claim that we make on based on limited evidence that we have. It's kind of an assumption that we start any kind of a research study for that matter, okay. So even though he has proved his point, all these 5 hypotheses he has actually proved through his own research, and a lot of other researchers have actually proved his claims. And there are also a lot of other studies, research studies, which has actually disproved this particular certain of these assumptions as well. He continues to maintain this as a hypothesis. He does not want to call it as a theory, okay. The reason behind that is he says, I want all the ELT practitioners to prove my study or even to disprove it, but I want people to actually engage with my hypothesis. So that's the reason as to why he maintains to call this particular hypothesis as hypothesis itself, okay, instead of calling it as a theorist. Actually he is a theorist, okay. And so this is in short a kind of difference between hypothesis and theory. So generally hypothesis leads to theory, and you look at the hypothesis also, you can actually, it can be formulated, a theory can be formulated through the hypothesis. Okay, so this is just for your understanding. I've given you a small image. Okay, let's move on to the 5 hypotheses. So these are the 5 hypotheses that he proposed, and we'll be going one by one now. Okay. So first one is acquisition learning hypothesis. So we do use this particular term acquisition and learning interchangeably, let's say in ELT, okay. But Krashen feels that we can't do that, and there is actually a very prominent difference or distinction between both these terms, okay. So what exactly is acquisition according to Stephen Krashen? Sorry. Okay. So he feels like acquisition is something that is a very natural process. It is something like you do it in a very subconscious way, and it is an informal learning context. It happens, and it's a kind of implicit learning process. And according to him, acquisition is not something that a teacher actually facilitates, and it does not happen inside a classroom. Okay, and most of the ELT practitioners go with the assumption that we are all aiding students to improve their acquisition, but that is not the case according to him. We all aid, provide them the kind of aid for the learning process, but not for the acquisition process according to Krashen, okay. And he feels all the grammar and the kind of learning learning that happens inside the classroom, that's an explicit learning that happens inside the classroom is learning, and not all learning can lead to acquisition, okay. So that is something that a lot of ELT practitioners and researchers have got a hard time believing or understanding, but that is what he feels, okay, because he feels that there are lots happening outside the classroom that leads to acquisition rather than what happens inside the classroom, okay. So that's a very key difference that we need to be aware of when we talk about acquisition learning with regard to Krashen. Okay, the second one is natural order hypothesis. Now what Krashen meant by natural order hypothesis is that there is a kind of an order in which we all acquire our language, be it first language or second language, and he felt like the same should be applied to second language because of course according to him there is an order in the way that we acquire our language. So that's a kind of a predictable order, and he feels like if the grammar text or the ELT practitioners, the teachers, the school teachers and class teachers are able to follow that particular order, predictable order, it will be easier for the learners to master the language. And that's the idea that he propounded using this natural order hypothesis. And he got along with Bailey and Madden, and he worked on a paper called Is There a Natural Sequence in Adult Second Language Learning, and then they actually proposed a few ideas based on that, and they also came up with a lot of textbook based on natural order hypothesis as well. And one more important thing that we need to be worried, thinking about right now is about errors. For decades together, errors of students have been looked down as a kind of an error in the sense like a mistake or as a deficiency on the part of the learner. And people like S.P. Corder changed that completely by saying that errors are not deficiency. Errors have to be looked at as a kind of learning milestone. Okay, so if a learner has made an error in one of the tenses, you should the teacher should actually look at it as a kind of a evidence of learning, so saying like, okay, this particular learner has actually mastered, let's say, present tense, but he has not mastered present continuous tense. So you can actually look at this as kind of a learning milestones rather than as a kind of a deficiency. And one more thing is errors are opportunities for the teachers to realize in what area they have been very clear in teaching a particular component and what area they have to give in more information as well. Okay, so the concept of error completely changed after S.P. Corder's paper on errors, significance of learner error as well. And because why are we talking about it here is that because he also talked about inbuilt syllabus for learning grammar of a language, which was very closely connected to what Krashen and others also talked about based on natural order hypothesis. Okay, so it's an example of natural order hypothesis. Okay, let's say like for example plural marker. Generally people assume, if you or even if you were as a kid, how you have mastered your grammar is if you interrogate personally, you would be able to see. For example, people go by like books, tanks, and all you add s plural everywhere and it becomes a plural. To all the nouns it becomes a plural. But students have a hard time, learners have a hard time realizing that when you add an s to a verb, it is not a plural, it actually becomes a singular. Okay, so these things they will be able to master only if you actually go step by step by going first with nouns and then moving on to the verbs. And similarly even in questions also, people do not have problems with framing a sentence, but when it comes to say like framing yes or no questions, they do have a problem. For example, let's say like today's class is interesting. Okay, so it's a sentence, so that is easier for a kid to say. Okay, but if you ask them to actually give a yes or no question, they do find it difficult because they need to invert the word order. And is today's class interesting is the right question, but people do find it very hard to do this inversion. Okay, so so like this he has given a lot of examples to state that how there is a natural order and it's essential for the teachers to help the learners to understand that particular natural order and also create modules in that particular way as well. Okay, but one more information is that this is one particular hypothesis which he felt like maybe he was not completely right in the the recent speeches that he gives in YouTubes and things like that. He also accepts that maybe we were very over enthusiastic in the initial stages. Maybe we should rethink on that as well. Okay, let's move on to the monitor hypothesis. So this is the third one. So what exactly do we mean by monitor? Okay, so he feels like all of us have this monitor in our mind, and this monitor actually is a outcome of our learned systems. Okay, let's say like our grammar. Okay, I think I'm going to have some water. Yes. You cut it. எடிட்டிங் பண்ணிடுவீங்க. ஓகே, ரொம்ப ட்ரை ஆயிடுச்சு. உங்களுக்கு ஏசி வேறு பயங்கரமாக இருக்குது. ஐம் ரியலி சாரி. யூ வில் கட் இட் இன் பிட்வீனா? யூ கான்ட் பாஸ் இட். பாஸ் பண்ண முடியாது. Thank you, ma'am. So where do I start? Okay, I'll start again with Monta hypothesis. Okay, so the Monta hypothesis, here he talks about how our learned system, okay, that is what we acquire in the formal learning system, like all the rules and regulations of a particular language system, the grammar, becomes a kind of a monitor for you to use or to monitor the output that is generated out of the acquisition. Okay, so what you produce, for example, any kind of language that you speak or write is monitored by the learned system, okay, the consciously learned system. Now for the monitor to function effectively, Krashen actually gives us 4 conditions based on which the monitor functions. Now for example, right now I am speaking, okay, my monitor is actually working, and it will work if I give it sufficient time. If I am going to just, and it's very difficult in the case of speaking, okay, because when I am speaking consciously, my monitor is also correcting, and it is actually looking at my sentence construction, and it's giving me information to the brain saying that, okay, you are right, or your tense is wrong, your vocabulary is right, and things like that. But it needs sufficient time, okay. So ideally speaking, monitor functions really well when you write, because you do have time to think about your construction, the form, and you can actually focus on the form. And one more thing is, you should be really worried about your form, okay, and you should be really thinking that I need to speak accurately. So only if you are actually focused on the form, your monitor would function. Or and the other one is, for the monitor to function, you should have awareness, okay, the awareness of the grammar rules. Earlier your learned system should be there for you to actually correct your errors, otherwise it's not going to function at all, okay. To explain this, I'm going to give you an example, okay, and Krashen also gives you a table talking about different kinds of uses. Now there's an example of, for example, I had one of my colleagues who was, she was good with the language, but she also had this problem with monitor, in the sense like not all the construction, that all the sentences that she used to speak was grammatically accurate. And the moment she gets an opportunity, she'll grab a mic and she'll start speaking, and we'll all be worried, okay, what's going to happen, because she's a person from our department, okay, from English department, and she's actually making mistakes, okay, very common mistakes. The problem was she was not hesitant, okay, and because she was an under user, because her monitor was not functioning, or she was not aware of the grammatical errors, and she was not aware what she was saying is wrong, okay, so she was not hesitant at all, but because she was not conscious of the rules, okay. Now lot of us, okay, when we go and stand in front of the mic, we are hesitant. Why? Because our monitor tells us, okay, don't make mistakes, or you're going to about to make mistakes. So that is why we become very reluctant, okay. So he categorizes people based on to what extent our monitor functions, okay. If you're an optimal user, you will be less hesitant because you're conscious of your grammar rules and you know that you are aware of your grammar rules. And if your monitor is overacting, okay, your monitor is saying like, okay, don't open your mouth at all because you are going to make mistakes, okay. When you're not very confident about your language, then you are an overuser, okay. So he categorizes based on your monitor level, based on your proficiency of your language only, okay. And what is very important is, monitor is based only on learned system, not the acquired system. Okay, we are coming to the 4th hypothesis, and that's a very significant hypothesis, because this entire 5 hypothesis is sometimes called as input hypothesis only, okay. The entire, sometimes they refer to Krashen's hypothesis as monitor model, sometimes simply as input hypothesis. Okay, and so for here also when he talks about input hypothesis, he says whatever he says in input hypothesis is related only to acquisition and not to learning. And the most significant aspect that he's talking about right now here is I plus 1. Okay. Now what exactly is I plus 1? I is the present competency of the particular learner. For example, if a learner already knows, let's say, okay, let's take a very preliminary example, like let's say like a learner already knows parts of speech, and if a teacher is going to go and teach parts of speech, the learner is not adequately challenged because the learner already knows it, okay, and he or she is not going to listen to you. But if the input is say he knows only parts of speech and you're going to teach him maybe like say subject verb agreement, concord, something very advanced way beyond his competency, also he's not going to learn. Okay, so let's say he knows parts of speech and you're going to move to the next level of let's say like tense, okay, present tense, or you're going to go for sentence construction, then a particular learner would learn. Okay, so that is what he says by I plus 1. From the I is your competency, plus 1 is the next level. Okay, so if your material or your instruction is marked the benchmark to the next level, the learner would learn. Okay, and that is the right level of input that you are giving to a particular student. Okay, so he talks about I plus 1, and one other important concept that he talks about here is comprehensibility. Okay, so the input should be comprehensible. It should be simplified, it should be in a very comprehensible way, and any kind of text that they are reading or any kind of instruction that they are listening should be in a very comprehensible way. It should be understandable, and that is when learning happens in a language classroom. Otherwise it does not happen at all. Okay, so these are the two important things with regard to input hypothesis. And apart from that, okay, he also talks about compelling input. Okay, so how should the input be? Okay, its input should not only be very comprehensible, simple and things like that, it should also be very compelling. Now what do we mean by compelling? Okay, compelling is not force. Compelling is like it should be compellingly interesting. Okay, it should be very interesting is what Krashen says. For that I am going to give you again an example to say like what exactly he means by compelling. I want to stop. Can you switch off the your innோட water bottle? Can you switch off your AC? It actually affects me. அப்படியே த்ரோட்டுக்குள்ள போகுது, இப்படி தான் உட்காந்துருக்கீங்கன்னு தெரியலையே. You will cut all these things, no? Sorry for making lot of mess. என்னோட தண்ணியை கொடுத்துருங்களேன் எனக்கு. வேணாம் நீங்கள் கஷ்டப்பட்டு ஹாட் வாட்டர் வச்சுருக்கீங்க. கம்ப்ளீட்டாக ட்ரை ஆகுது எங்கே? புரிய நிறைய பேசுகிறேண்ணா. எவ்வளோ நேரம் ஆயிடுச்சு? அதனாலயா? நான் 10 minutesல முடிச்சிடுறேன், சரியா? சாரி. போச்சு, கரெக்டாக கொட்டி விட்ருக்கேன். ஓகே, எங்கே ஆரம்பிச்சேன்? ஓகே. Okay, so input hypothesis, he talks about being compelling. The input should be very interesting so that the students do not know that they are actually engaged in the process of learning. And he famously announced the end of motivation. Like generally when we talk about language acquisition, we all talk about how the learners need to be motivated. Okay, only if they are motivated they'll be able to learn the language. But he felt motivation is nothing, because you don't need motivation to learn, as long as the input that you're giving is very compelling and comprehensible. Okay, so for that he gives an example of how instead of giving his example, I would also give another example. For example, there is one in my neighborhood, there is one of the student, 5-year-old kid, okay, and they are Punjabi family, and both the parents are from Punjab, and they don't speak actually Tamil. They have been in the neighborhood for about 2 years, but their Tamil is not really good. But the kid, amazingly, at the age of 5 is able to speak Tamil excellently. Okay, and the kid does not go to school. So you may wonder like how is it a kid does not go to school but he's still able to speak the language. They had a maid who's from Tamil background, and the moment both the parents go to work, the maid actually plays all the Tamil cartoon. Okay, so through the cartoon, the kid was able to, because if you look at the cartoon, it's very compelling. Okay, at the same time, it is also very comprehensible. So the kid was able to learn or pick up the language, and this is actually acquisition. It's not learning at all. He's not in a formal setup, but still he's able to speak the language perfectly. Okay, he was able to interact with people. Any person who came to his house, he was able to answer them much better than the parents themselves. Okay, so this is what is called, we mean by compelling and comprehensible input, because it's given in a very compelling way. It's like comics, and it is also very comprehensible for the kid, because it's not very advanced level Tamil that you would see in a comic video as well. Okay, and in these kind of cartoons as well. Okay, so he also gives you a very similar example as to do that, and I'm going to give you an example right now. Okay, you're going to look at two comic strips here, and this is from I believe most of you would know Dennis the Menace. Okay, so you, in the first strip, you find Dennis, and he's actually taken by his mother, and you find you are the one who said the new neighbors lived only a stone's throw away. So we find you can understand, I believe. Okay, a stone's throw away means like somebody who's close by, and the kid has taken it very literally in the sense, and he has actually thrown the stone at the neighbor's house, and he has actually broken the windows. Okay, so in the next strip you find Dennis is actually facing the wall, because his mother has discovered that he has eaten all the cookies at home, and he finds that Dennis is not interested in eating the dinner anymore, and so she's able to understand that Dennis has eaten all the cookies. Okay, and so she punishes him by saying, okay, you go and face the wall. Okay, you keep repeating it. Now you have two pictures talking about idioms and phrases. Okay, so generally when we are discussing idioms and phrases, we actually give them the idiom and we give them the meaning. But whereas if you are going to introduce using this kind of comic strips, at the end of the day, say like 10 comic strips are given, and they would have learned 10 different idioms and phrases as well. Okay, so this is one example of making your input compelling in a English classroom. Okay, and then we are moving on to the last hypothesis, that's affective filter hypothesis. Now what exactly is filter? Like you all know, it's a kind of a strain that we use to filter, for example in coffee, tea and things like that, we all use filters. So what exactly like Krashen mean by affective filter or gestival filter is that he feels like students, all of us, generally any learner for that matter will have filter. Okay, you decide whether you're going to receive the input or not. Okay, even if your input is very compelling. If for example, let's say the particular learner is very sad on that day due to some personal reasons, even if your input is very comprehensible and compelling, she's not going to listen to you. She's not going to allow that input to enter into her processing system at all. So what does Krashen mean by that? Why does he say that? He says like it's a duty of the teacher to make sure the filter is not very high. Okay, if the filter is high, the input is also becoming very less. They will not be in a very, they will not be in a mood to actually listen to you. Okay, so it is the job of the teacher to make sure the filter is wide open, so that you can actually give them a lot of learning opportunities. So these are the 5 effective filter, and this is like I told you, how he talked about the end of motivation. So most people don't care about acquisition, it's about the interesting story or the interesting content that's more important. So as long as the English teachers are able to do that, students are going to learn. Okay. Okay, let's move on. So this is by Greg. He has actually talked about, he has collated all the 5 hypotheses, and he actually has given us this kind of a picture. This will also give you an example, I mean, will give you an overview of all the 5 Krashen's hypotheses. It's just for your reference. And moving on to Richards and Rogers framework. So they talk about objective, yes, like what are the skills that is actually concentrated here. All the 4 skills are concentrated, and it's actually a process oriented approach. And syllabus is based on situational syllabus, functional syllabus, notional syllabus, or topic based syllabus. Okay. And the other part and design is role of the teacher. So the teacher is the primary source of comprehensible input, okay, and he or she plays a very central role in creating a classroom condition which is low and effective filter, and the teacher should also be a material designer, okay, because he or she should be able to choose the right kind of a material and mix it appropriately as well, okay. So based on the students' interest and things like that, they should be able to orchestrate the right kind of activity inside the classroom. Moving on to the role of learner. The learner is supposed to be a processor of comprehensible input, and they should be actively involved in the process, okay, of processing the input, and they also have the time to decide when to speak, okay. So one important thing about the difference I told you about direct method and this particular natural approach is that students are given the time to decide whether they want to start producing or start creating sentences, start writing sentences, start speaking sentences. So they are given the time to decide, because natural approach believes that they need that kind of a silent period for them to process information, and once they are ready they can decide, I mean they can start speaking or producing sentences. And what about the role of teaching and learning activities? They use a lot of realia, okay, like maps, advertisements, comics, books. Like for example, I gave you a comic strip right now. Books and maps and different activities to improve their communicative competence. So this is about Krashen. So we have actually looked at natural approach and all the 5 hypotheses based on which this particular natural approach has been built on. Thank you, students.